Moving on for the college game day game of the week to maybe the most high-profile game. It's up there, one of the most high-profile games. Here we have number 1, Georgia, a 10-point road favorite. Number 18, Tennessee, in the latest college football playoff rankings. And this game carries an over-under 59 points. It kicks off at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS, right where I believe it belongs. That is the perfect network for this kind of game. So Brock Bowers is back, caught a touchdown last week after he thought he was off to the NFL, but apparently not. He wants one more shot at a championship, it appears, whether it be SEC or national or both. Georgia was without Jamon Dumas Johnson at linebacker. Smart says he's week to week with an arm injury and that they're trying to get him back, but to me that doesn't really sound like he'll go. You've locked in your spot in the conference championship game. It's probably best to keep someone as prolific as Dumas Johnson curbed until you can get into the postseason. You bring him back at full health. I don't think that he's going to go for this game, to be honest. Tennessee on the other side, they have their own injuries as well. Dante Thornton, the transfer wide receiver from Oregon, he's done for the season. Jabari Small was limited last week against Missouri as well. Joe Milton is he's running out of viable options to throw to. Brew McCoy, of course, had the nasty injuries. He's done for the year. In Tennessee, they're suffering from it. They're obviously not the same elite offense that we had last year under Alex Galesh and Malik Hooker, but they've taken a huge step back. And you want to talk about getting dominated, man. Tennessee was held to 48% of their available yards, 17% success rate in the red zone. They turned the ball over 3 times against Missouri. It was one of those games where the first half was pretty close, but then Missouri started to put their foot down, and there was kind of a realization in the third quarter, like, is Tennessee going to get blown out? Because they were going 3 and out all the time. They had a couple of turnovers in plus territory. But to me, asking Joe Milton to do everything is just a recipe for disaster. And I do believe Missouri, very, very good football team, no doubt about it. They hung with Georgia, of course, but I think Georgia's in scorched earth mode, just like James Madison, even at number 1. What they did so well defensively against Ole Miss came at the second level. So the Rebels had 1.9 line yards per rush. That's pretty good, especially against a defense like Georgia. But the Dogs only allowed 1.7 second level yards, which means they were flying down these ball carriers, crashing down on them, making really sound tackles and not missing very many of those tackles, not giving Ole Miss an opportunity to be breaking off really anything. They held them to absolutely nothing until that game was well out of reach. Jalen Wright is one of the most explosive backs on Tennessee. He makes his dime with breakaway runs. He's not going to be having a lot of opportunities for breakaway runs against Georgia. On the offense, though, Carson Beck, pretty darn good. He was kind of not a nothing burger, but he was silently kind of compiling these stats and playing really well, but it was against suspect competition, so he didn't get a lot of looks. And now he comes out and shines against these better teams, and people are starting to notice that Carson Beck, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in probably top 3 of Heisman odds coming into next season. Georgia averaged 9.5 yards per play against Ole Miss and 0.5 EPA per play. For context, every time they snap the football, go ahead and just tick another half point to their score. That's how badly they beat up on Ole Miss here. They picked up 88% of available yards. Of course, Ole Miss's defense has a lot of concerns. They're not very good. Tennessee is a bit better than that, but I don't know that they're much better than that. What do your numbers say?
Yeah, Brett, you set the stage really nicely. I feel like some people have turned their attention away from this game since Georgia has already clinched the East. But with a watchability score of 9.6, this is my number 1 game of the week. It's actually the number 12 game of the entire regular season by this metric. I'm very interested in this one, and I think it's going to be closer than Vegas projects. I only have Georgia minus 6.5. It's a 68% win expectancy for the Dogs. It's safe to say that the Georgia offense has hit its stride. You said it's scorched earth mode. I like that a lot. The unit is currently ranked a season best number 5 nationally and has scored at least 30 points in 5 straight games now. This defense, they've been great all year. They're ranked number 5 again this week. You put those 2 top 5 units together, and Georgia is right back in the top 4 of my power ratings for the first time in over a month. Of course, they started the year number 1, kind of played with their food a little bit there for the first half of the season, fell to number 10 in the power ratings. They are now back up into the top 4. As they seem to do every year this time of year, the Dogs appear to have found that next gear, that scorched earth mode. They're putting it all together down the stretch here, presenting the biggest test on both sides of the ball that Tennessee will face all season based on my current numbers. Probably not surprising. By this point, and you touched on it, Brett, we all recognize the 2023 Tennessee team isn't quite on the same level as 2022 Tennessee, but as a reminder to kind of reset the expectation here, that 2022 Tennessee team, from a power rating standpoint, that was the best team we've seen in Knoxville since 1998. And of course, Tennessee fans remember that year very fondly, winning the BCS National Championship in 1998. That doesn't mean the Vols aren't a really good football team this year. My numbers suggest they are, and that's despite, let's call it what it is, the disastrous game in Columbia last week. The offense has taken a step back, Brett, as you mentioned, but it still ranks in the top 20 nationally. The defense has exceeded preseason realistic expectations. It ranks in the top 25 in the country. Some of the intangibles here in this game, which again, the model's not necessarily capturing, but it's important to consider, they seemingly favor Tennessee as well. In many cases, there's exceptions to everything, but in many cases, we see a bounce back from teams that just got blown out. That would be Tennessee at Missouri last week. And we see a potential letdown from teams that just blew a team out. That would be Georgia at home last week against a then CFP top 10 ranked Ole Miss team. Now, Georgia being number one, Kirby might be able to use that to light a fire. Somehow Kirby's able to motivate when they're not number one, and he motivates when they're number one. He's very good that way. There's a reason this man has won 2 straight national championships. But another intangible that goes towards Tennessee here, this is a revenge game for the Vols, and fans in Knoxville would like nothing more than to knock off this freshly minted number one CFP ranked team in the country, just like Georgia did to Tennessee in Athens last year when the Volunteers rolled in there as the CFP's number one team a couple weeks earlier in the season, if I'm not mistaken. Ultimately, though, I think this game will be closer than Vegas. My numbers do give the advantage to Georgia on both sides of the ball, and despite having to go into this hostile environment, I do have Georgia minus 6.5. It's a 68% chance to win the game outright, and now that we know it will be Georgia versus Alabama in Atlanta, we can confidently assign some probabilities to what's the chance that Georgia finishes the deal here. 34% chance that Georgia goes 13-0, beating Alabama in the SEC championship game. And at that point, I guess there would be a debate about, are they the number one team or the number two team in the committee's rankings? Because by that point, Ohio State will have added Michigan to the resume too. But I think with Georgia having the opportunity to add Tennessee this week and Alabama and Atlanta, and they're not supposed to consider this, but try to tell me they don't, 2-time defending national champs, I do think Georgia would be the number one team. And with a resume like that, hey, I've knocked Georgia's resume to date and their ranking to date, but you add these wins that they would have in this scenario, I'm not going to have a huge issue with Georgia being up there at the top.
It's a tough ask on the road, and you raise a lot of very, very good points about what Georgia's going to be walking into here. And, of course, Neyland Stadium, one of the best atmospheres in all of college football, but and I see what your model says, Kelly. I'm laying the points with Georgia again. This team is, like you said, really rounding into form. I think that they take advantage in just every asset or facet of the game. They have an advantage, in every facet of the game, except playing on the road in Neyland. Forcing Joe Milton to do too much without his pass catchers against a terrific Georgia secondary, to me, is a recipe for turnovers. Georgia is healthier and getting healthier, besides Dumas Johnson, of course. I'm not sure that it's going to be quite the same level as last week, of course. That's a almost unrepeatable ass kicking, to be very blunt about it, against a top 10 team. But this feels like a take care of business game once again for Georgia, even with the SEC East locked up. Like you said, Kirby Smart doesn't fall asleep at the wheel. That's not what he does. I think Georgia walks in here. I think they beat them pretty soundly. Tennessee's really hurting from those injuries. I'm laying the points with Georgia on the road.